Hello, my name is Dr. Artour Rakhimov and I'm here with Volker Schmitz, who is Shaolin Kung Fu teacher for more than 20 years. He's from Hamburg, Germany, and I'm going to ask him a question about changes that took place in people in relation to their breathing during last 100 years and how these changes influenced practice of Shaolin Kung Fu, and also a related question, how practicing this martial arts, this ancient arts, can help us to regain our health and can help us also to retrain our breathing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's the same. It's comparable to yoga, that in times where Shaolin Kung Fu was developed in China, the breathing was, as we know from studies, was completely different than today. So let's put it in numbers. People at this time were 2 times to 3 times less than people of today.
We would breathe in slow and less air, and that makes that we would have much more oxygen in the body. Because when we hyperventilate, we get less oxygen. It's medical law, medical fact. So if we change, okay, so 100...
Yes, and 100 years ago, of course, if they trained this art, they often train very hard and very long times.
More time.
Which they also, some people, of course, do today also. But you don't have that fast regeneration then. Recovery will be worse when your breathing is not on this level. So, and also it relates to which is a very central factor, what many people do not realize to the degree of real importance, is that meditation is in the center of all these Chinese movement arts, and the ability to understand what meditation means and where it leads to is much better for people with better breathing. Mm-hmm. Therefore, in yoga, it's very common that people, before they even start with meditation, that they do a few years of breathing retraining or breathing training, and in old yoga, of course. And the same goes for us in Shaolin Kung Fu. If we want to meditate on high level, we need also a decent kind of breathing. Mm-hmm. And it would be another factor.
These days, if we talk about medical studies, which I have on my website normalbreathing.com and my books as well, people breathe about twice the norm, twice more than the norm, a medical norm, which is about, so we breathe 12 liters a minute instead of 6. Yeah. And that makes them twice less oxygenated. So we would have about only 20-25 seconds for the body oxygen test. So probably your Shaolin Kung Fu teaches, when we arrive to your classes, we would have 20-25 seconds.
Yeah, my better students, of course, they are at some point where they are able to breathe through their nose.
During exercise.
During exercise. Mm-hmm. And we have this Kung Fu forms, which are extremely intensive exercises, which are normally are 1 minute long, round about 1 minute, maybe some a little bit longer, where you move very fast with different movements, maybe some acrobatics involved. And it's very difficult to breathe through the nose, because if you're able to breathe through the nose during this kinds of exercises, most of the students would have at least 25, mostly more than 30 CP, which is already quite decent. So this is one of my goals and with my students to tell them to close the mouth during exercises, which is also a more traditional approach, because that was, of course, normally the case often 200 years ago, because people had so high values. For them, it was not much of a problem to exercise with closed mouth.
Yes, as we discussed during my talk about long distance endurance running, people who have 60 seconds for the body oxygen test, we breathe like about 3 times less air at rest before exercise. So therefore, according to laws of physiology, the laws of sport physiology, when we start exercising, we breathing remains at the reduced level. So we have less air, and that allows them to have easy nose breathing.
And other effects are, of course, when the breathing is enhanced, at the concentration, which is another central factor. You know, as a professional sports coach, that high-level athletes do a lot of mind training, for example, like the visualization and imagination of the performance. And we also do it a lot in acrobatic stuff, or even in the jumps of Shaolin, or even these forms because they are so strenuous. We cannot do 50 of those forms in a row, which maybe is needed to be on the highest level technically. So we maybe do 10 rows, and the rest we do in the mind, which is also a lot enhanced when the breathing is better, because the oxygenation, of course, also leads to better oxygenated brain. And this is another factor. There are many, of course.
And so we discussed kind of that, we explained that with people 100 years ago and before, when we had easier breathing, much more oxygen in the body, the practice were different therefore. But if we talk about more modern people, let's say somebody who would have like 15, 20 seconds, and many students who just start their practice, or who kind of at the beginner or medium level, we start their practice, we still would have 15, 20 seconds for the body oxygen test. How this state of breathing is going to influence the practice of Shaolin? What type of abnormalities you are going to notice in this type of students?
Yeah, all the common abnormalities on this stage, like impaired health often, and impaired
diseases.
Having diseases or having very low ability to exercise hard, or it can be even dangerous for them to exercise hard.
Panting, hyperventilating.
Yes. Maybe there's also something related to the psychological state, or maybe too anxious, or
panic
maybe
attacks, anxiety.
they are very less confident than people with large recipes, which is also, of course, when it comes to martial arts or acrobatics, very important to have some confidence about your skill. And generally, the whole skill, like the gracie, can I say that? Gracie of movement? Like
graciousness
of movement, graciousness. Something like this.
Harmony.
Yeah, like the skill, because kung fu or gung fu actually mainly means skill. So you can be also have gung fu of drawing or some other gung fu that only means skill. And Shaolin Kung Fu means skill in this art of Shaolin, which is this martial art. So movement skill level is often impaired on this level. So and technical, sometimes they need just much more time to learn certain movement.
And in addition to that, for example, in relation to lifestyle, modern people, because of that, also sleep much longer, like somewhere around 7-8 hours of sleep is very common these days for people like in the -4th stage of disease. Sure. Whereas, as we see in our students now,
the advantages.
When students achieve up to 60 seconds for the body oxygen test, sleep is naturally 4.5 hours without trying, and that allows people to have more time on physical exercise.
And also, it can be very hard to do. Shaolin Kung Fu can be very hard training. It's really hard from China. This is a traditional thing to train relatively hard for years. And because it was invented, as people have a lot
in a different health state,
much better breathing, and they have no problems with this kind of hard training. But these days, if I let people train so hard, I tend to make the training a little bit easier these days, maybe a little bit less, a few more breaks here and then, or a few less repetitions or things like this, because you simply cannot train on this level on which they did a few hundred years ago most of the time.
Whereas therefore we can conclude that breathing retraining allows people to practice the original Shaolin Taekwondo.
And with fun, because of course there are people that practice very, very hard, but then they do 10 years and the body sometimes do not react very well to it because it was too hard. And also if they train, their psychological state of mind is more on the masochistic side and not so much on the fun side, which it should be. And of course, with these higher values, you have an exact feeling how hard you can train, and still it will be beneficial for your body, and your state of mind will all the time positive, which is of course very important.